Welcome to Dissection. My name is Adam Blue. For today's episode, I wanted to talk about the hallmarks that make up what could be a lost ancient civilization. Now, one part of that is a lost advanced ancient civilization because these hallmarks that I'm about to show, they haven't really been confirmed of the dating or what they're from, because it's very strange that we're seeing these across cultures around the globe in ancient times when at different parts of the world, supposedly, there was way different levels of technology. Some had not even gotten into the Iron Age yet, or even metallurgy. Some were using basic stone tools, yet we're finding stone like granite that has been worked on in ways that are beyond anything we've been able to produce today. So, I want to take a look at it, and then I want to pose this question as well as, is this what Atlantis was, right? You know, a lot of times Atlantis is talked about a single location or like an island, but through my research, I'm drawing a theory of a conclusion that this Atlantis is what is being discussed is a lost ancient civilization that existed around the globe, that had these hallmarks based on their technology around the globe. A cataclysm occurred, which will be another video, and now we're seeing the remnants of that. So yeah, let's get started and take a look. All right, first is nubs, right? So the nub phenomenon is very interesting because we do see this everywhere around the world. It could be Egypt, it could be Peru, it could be Jordan, it could be India. Anywhere that there's a megalithic structure, there's most likely a nub. Even inside the Great Pyramid, there's a nub in the area. So what's a nub exactly? Well, a nub happens to be something you'll find on any of the megalithic stones. That means these large stones or stones that look like they're beveled, that look like they're joined together without any sort of joinery in the middle, just, slapped together. There's not really any known function of these nubs. And that's what's interesting about it. There was the whole idea that, well, they're made for lifting, but we found nubs on bedrock. We've found stones that don't have nubs, but some that do, but they have them like in odd places that it wouldn't make sense for lifting. So that has been thrown out as a theory. And another interesting part of these nubs is we find them on other hallmarks that I'm going to talk about here shortly. So there's kind of this stair-step look that I'll get to in a second. There's some megalithic structures with that stair-step look that have nubs. There are columns. Sometimes you refer to them as Greek or Roman columns. That is another megalithic architecture that sometimes there are nubs on those as well. So the nub thing, it's there, it's real. There's so many. You just search for on Google, there's going to be so many images with these nubs everywhere. It's pretty crazy. All right, and that sort of stair-step pattern I was talking about, here's a look at it here. I think this one is in Petra, Jordan. You can kind of see that look right here. And there's also some that were found in Peru as well. Here we go. So from Peru, this is in Pumapunku specifically, and you can kind of see where that stair-step pattern is being used. And what's interesting is there's another site, I don't know if it's Pumapunku or another one, where it's actually on a gigantic megalith where it looks like it was worn down, where there was more of the pattern that's on there. And something I want to bring up from the nubs and with this is, again, this is done on some very hard stone that in some civilizations, they did not have the technology. So if you think of the ancient Egyptians and the technology that they had at that same time period as the ones in Pumapunku, that really doesn't make sense if you look at the technology the civilizations would have. Yet we are seeing these all over the world, and the dating is all over the place. I mean, this is very specific architecture and engineering to have just randomly show up at different times when we cannot reproduce it today. Okay, and the specific name for that is actually the stair-step motif. I want to thank the AHC channel for sharing this information with me. I'll link it below. But what he's done here is breaking everything down actually by location. So we can see Ollantaytambo, that's in South America. We can see Turkey. They have all of the same of the stair-step motif. So let's look at Italy here. And it's doing that, the stair-step triangle technique now, actually. I have to zoom in a little more so you can actually see. It's doing the pyramid shape, but it actually has that stair-step look to it. Here's Nineveh, Iraq, stair-step technique. Now you could say, okay, well, those areas are close to each other. Well, then here is South America, and this is a giant megalithic structure that, yes, has these weird, smaller megalithic stones in the middle with nubs on them, and it has the stair-step motif. So again, it's very strange to see these very specific patterns all around the world within megalithic ruins. This is one of my favorites. This one is in Africa, Ethiopia, I believe. This was dug into the ground, right? This was the bedrock, built into the bedrock, and this contains all of those hallmarks that we were talking about. Pinch holes. So this is another strange one. And as we go through and we see these different hallmarks, we don't necessarily know what they mean or what they're for, and that's okay. We don't need to know everything right now. I guess the first step really into figuring things out that we don't understand is just look at the patterns, look at everything. So here are the pinch holes, which seem to just show up almost like afterwards. You can see, these two holes, which seems very interesting. It looks like these may be on like the Stonehenge. This one is Stonehenge. So what's interesting is you'll see these pinch holes, and we'll look at some more here soon. Sometimes they connect to the other side, and that's why they're called pinch holes, because it's like something went in and pinched that. And one thing I'll say is as we go through this, a lot of times it looks like the megalithic stone could have been Play-Doh at first. All right, so that's something else to keep in mind. It seems like the processing or whatever was done to the megalithic blocks made it to where it could be shaped, unless the tool itself had properties and energy that was able to kind of penetrate its state, its solid state, and kind of turn it into maybe a liquid. Okay, so we have in China, just an interesting block here that has like that pinch hole. Again, it's two holes that seem to connect to each other. Here's Israel. Here's a little pinch hole right there. Göbekli Tepe as well, which this is a very interesting site because this was just recently unearthed. And when it was unearthed, it was found that, it was deliberately buried sometime after its construction. Well, that means it was buried. They were able to determine it was buried about 12,000 years ago. So then you have to consider, okay, so these structures had to have been made before 12,000 years ago. And these structures are around the world. So that's what's very interesting. Again, this is Turkey, but we're seeing stuff that looks very similar to like the jaguars in South America here. So again, more evidence pointing to a worldwide civilization based on these hallmarks. Random stone in Mexico looks like it's laying on the ground. Again, what are the pinch holes for? We don't really know. Malta, here, there's a whole series of them here. Very interesting. And then India, Georgia, Baalbek, China, we looked at Egypt, just everywhere. It is very fascinating that we find these. We don't know what they were for, but they're so consistent and around the world and on the megalithic architecture. All right, Keystone clamps. So these are very interesting because these almost suggest metal would have been in use, right? A keystone clamp. So both sides of a stone that's fitted together has sort of this cutout, looks like a bow tie in some instances, but that would have been filled with some sort of liquid metal in order to allow them to attach together. Again, what's interesting is since this is on the megalithic architecture with the pinch holes, the nubs, Göbekli Tepe being older than 12,000 years ago, we're going to have to assume that is the same here, and that means the metallurgy was done at that time, which is not what is in our current academic record. I guess if you were to go to school to study a keystone cut, you actually wouldn't. You would be studying a specific civilization that happened to have that, and then there would be just some answer of why it's there, when really what we're looking at is a worldwide use, and it's very interesting. So, this doesn't really show the locations, but it's showing them clearly here. The keystone cuts that would have had the metal there. I think there's some areas where they've found, okay, this is a little blurry, but Armenia, Bolivia, Lebanon, Ethiopia, Cambodia, again, all over the world. So metallurgy would have been used all over the world. If you're thinking that metal has been used all over the world, that means mining would have been done all over the world. And another video I'll get to later speaks on potentially the pyramids of Egypt being the mining waste storage of the metal, the iron or whatever metals it would have got to use that. There's a lot of interesting things that have to do with the pyramids, and I won't get to that today. But one thing, when I say it was for mining waste storage, I also think the pyramid was used for something else. And I think it stands with a lot of these hallmarks, and a lot of any advanced techniques or civilization is the integrated information theory, where something is done for a specific function, but it also will have multiple functions as well. That's kind of hard to explain at this point, but as we go through on this channel and I do more videos, I will point out every time something might be based in that integrated information theory, or that things had multiple functions, basically. So filler stones, these are very interesting because it's, again, the shape of the megalithic blocks in the first place are very odd. That the functionality seems to be that they're like earthquake proof, because they're multi-ton blocks. Two, they're shaped in puzzle piece ways on purpose and fitted together without mortar. But these filler stones, that's what's very interesting. Let's look at Peru. So, look at this. Giant megalithic blocks. But there's this little stone that was put in the middle there. And you can't even fit a human hair in there. Very interesting. Here, another example. We can see those filler stones in there. Sometimes it does look like there's space in there, but we can kind of see that too on the left-hand side. And I think that has to do with them going through earthquakes. They're earthquake proof, so they're still standing, but there's still damage done by earthquakes. And if this is over 12,000 years old, that tells us it's been through many earthquakes, maybe even some that we modern humans have not really gone through and recorded. Here's another one, very interesting, because we're seeing a nub also. And we're seeing where, grass has been growing on these areas as well. The filler stone right here. And there's even some that have been found in Egypt. Basically, anywhere there's megalithic architecture, you'll come across one or two. It's very strange how that works, where so far there's not a pattern of why, even for the nubs, but we just know they exist. Oh, and here's Easter Island. Very similar stuff to Peru, Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo. It's just very interesting that, that stuff's closer together, but still doesn't align with the ancient civilizations that existed here and the technology that they were at. Just look at the size of this person next to the stones. I haven't really talked much about Japan, but yeah, here's Japan. Although it looks like there's been a lot of damage here too, even some pinch holes among some maybe damage that occurred. Depending on how old that is, it could be anything. Here's Italy, and it's very interesting. We can see right there the filler stone. What's interesting I've noticed with like Italy or areas in the Mediterranean is they have this very specific like Cyclopean style megalithic architecture. So what's interesting is we're seeing very similar architecture around the world, but the way the stones are then aligned seem to be slightly different. And I think the only way we can tell that is because there's so much of the megalithic stone structures around the world that we can tell, like in South America, they all look one way, in the Middle East, they all look one way. In Europe, they all look one way, even though it's all very similar. If there was only one site in each area, we would just assume, a bunch of giant blocks put together, still fascinating. But because there's so many sites in these areas we can look at, we can see specific areas in the world kind of put their stones together a certain way. Next, this is called odd processing marks, scoops and scratches. It's very interesting about this. Okay, so we look at this first one here. And what's interesting is seeing it. This is on an Olmec head, and it's interesting, which is in Mexico. But look at the scratches. They look very interesting. It's interesting to see that. It looks like, they were just damaging it because they didn't like it. Again, some of the stone, the hardness, it would be hard to do, but also that it's done around the world. And this is in the Middle East here. We can see, again, those same. So we saw Mexico, now Middle East. Same looking style scratches on this stone. Also, another look at a stone here. Just kind of looking at the way the scratches are on here, like the processing. It looks like, was this done? It looks like tool marks, but for most of the civilizations at this time, they wouldn't have had tools that were hard enough to do this. Something that's very common, we see this on the granite boxes in Egypt, are these scoop marks here. In Jordan and Baalbek, Lebanon, I think it is, they have I think it's Baalbek, Lebanon. They have that stone of the pregnant woman, I think it's called, but it's still in the ground. And there's one nearby, I think, that still hasn't been fully cut out. This could be what it is, but there's just the scoop mark. So it's like that I talked about earlier, where it looks like what tool was used to change or manipulate the stone in this way. In Egypt here, we could see the bottom left, even in this area right here, there's a lot of those sort of scratches and scoops at the same time. Again, very interesting that we're seeing these. Not sure of this exact location actually from this image, but we are seeing on the stonework here a lot of those scratches. And here is, against a hard surface. I don't know how easy it is to see, but we can kind of see these consistent line patterns. Some of them almost look like it's done like with a tool, where it takes a certain area of the surface it's working on and then it moves. So as you can see here, it's like a consistent pattern. So you can see how it kind of curves here, and then it comes back down and does that as if it was a tool just going back and forth and then realigning. And here's in India, I believe. Yeah, I believe it's India, and over in that location, the columns kind of tell me that. But yeah, look at it here. It looks very much the same. That old type of stone having this done. Now, what does that mean? Why is that all over the world in this supposedly older than 12,000-year-old stonework? And I'm scrolling down here. There's just way more examples that just keep going with that. It's very interesting, and it's still there's not been anything that explains it. And even if there is in one location, you would have to then account for that in every location and the time period and the civilization that existed to do that and what tools they had. Oh, I like the look of this. This really has interesting finishing on here, like it's tool marks or whatever. This is a very interesting finish. And something I've never really considered before is seeing how some of them are not aligned directly. It tells me maybe they were done separately before it was put together. Not too sure. Now, these Colosseums are very interesting. They have them in Rome. They even have them in South America. These are around the world. And the interesting thing, I didn't consider these megalithic architecture, because to me, it was the first time I was viewing something that seemed like it had an obvious purpose. An auditorium kind of has an obvious purpose to it. When with, all the other megalithic architecture, we couldn't figure that out. But there's a lot of these sites where the Colosseum rows have the nubs on them. So when I'm seeing nubs on them, in my mind, I determine that, yes, that is part of the megalithic civilization, or the whoever was able to engineer all the megalithic work also did the Colosseums. It's even the same with these Greek and Roman style columns. So again, first, when considering far ancient lost history, when it came to these columns, I didn't think much of it until people were sharing photos of columns with not only pinch holes, but also nubs on them. And then there's different columns. There's columns that seem to be cut into sections so that they can be fit together, whereas some are gigantic, like in Egypt, they're just all one solid piece. And even with the ones that are fitted together, some, it seems like that was done on purpose, but in order to be moved because someone came in to take over that territory. And that's what we see with a lot of these ancient megalithic sites, is civilizations have built upon them. But a lot of times the columns would be cut up and then repurposed later. So it's very interesting. When you think of Atlantis, or maybe at least when I do, I think underwater, columns, stonework. And then that's when, recently I've kind of come to the conclusion where, so maybe in our history, the idea of what Atlantis was has kind of stuck with us in a way, not realizing that what we are calling out as like kind of the fictional idea of Atlantis is really pulling from, something maybe in the back of our minds. This also has to do with when the Greeks, talk about their gods, were they maybe speaking on just men of renown from that time period? Because a lot of what they talk about with their gods actually are reflected in the Bible, just named differently, but they had similar purposes. But when we get into the mythology too, especially when it comes to these men of renown, whether that's from the Bible or in Greek, they talk about how they were stone workers. They knew how to work stone. So, we're getting a lot of interesting crossover here of where it could be. Now, drawing the conclusion of it being Atlantis, to me, it makes more sense that Atlantis is referring to an ancient worldwide civilization. And I think it's hard for humans, especially at the time of Plato, to grasp the idea that there was an advanced civilization before us. Because right now, humans kind of have a mindset where we are the best we can be, we have ever been. That's what some of the issues with academia, research, and new information that comes out is there can't be anything new that changes what was done before. And in fact, if you look at ancient history of any philosophers or scientists that would speak up about their ideas of the Earth not being the center of the universe, people were threatened with death, where they had to renounce what they've spoken of on their deathbed. People were shamed for that. And that's not too uncommon with today. On Reddit, there will be people that will post questions about ancient Egypt, about the ancient stonework that we don't have all the answers for. And people go in and say what's usually written in academia, if you look on Wikipedia, what it says. But, some people will come in and say there's an alternate view to this since it hasn't been fully discovered and we have these facts here. But people get mad at that. People get very mad if you come in with other information that's not official. And people jump to the conclusions that because you are considering there's more to the story, that you must be some, crazy, wacky, person. And hey, I've tried to have discourse on Reddit about things, and people get nasty. They'll send DMs saying, things about me having a mental disorder or that I should kill myself, and it was crazy. And so a lot of times it tells me if people that hold on to that act that way, that's even more proof that keeping an open mind and considering other options is probably the way forward. Keeping a closed mind and threatening people doesn't get humanity far. So that's it. I just wanted to go through a bunch of the different hallmarks that I've come across that happen to be everywhere around the world. If there's anything I didn't point out, please comment that below. If there's anything that you want more clarity on, let me know, and I can do a follow-up video on that. Again, link in the description for the people that go into extreme detail on this. I'm just here to put it together for you. So thanks for watching Dissection. We'll talk later.